Welcome to Steve. We got a name for this show now.
Yeah,
We took some feedback from the audience. We brainstormed ourselves amongst the Inside Nebraska team, and we're keeping it simple. We're calling this the Nebraska Football Show, just because that's what this is. We're talking about Nebraska football, nothing really else, just what's happening between the lines. So we'll get right into it. But first, Steve, let's go. How do we feel about the name?
I like it. I think it's very clean. And it just kind of speaks to what this podcast is going to be about. And it's just going to be about inside the white lines. It's just going to be about the football. We're going to be talking about opponent names, opponent concepts, things like that. Nebraska players, how Nebraska's doing. We're really not going to venture outside of those two things each week. So I'm excited about it. I think the name really fits us. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think we could start we get right into it, but start with this last week. Nebraska obviously beat UTEP 40-7. We're a couple of days now removed from that game. I guess for you, kind of what are your lasting takeaways? What's really stuck out to you upon rewatches, upon getting back into the film, and just like getting from the press conferences post game, kind of what's really stuck out to you?
Yeah, so I have some things in mind. I don't think we really need to spend a ton of time on Dylan Raiola. Look, I mean, he met expectations. I think everybody expected him to do what he did, and he went out there and did it. So that in it of itself is really good to see. So, Nebraska has a quarterback. That's my biggest takeaway. And they didn't have one last year, and it's been kind of a revolving door of injuries and backups having to come in at the position in recent seasons. But now Nebraska has a real quarterback who can elevate the ceiling of the program in Dylan Raiola. So that was really cool to see. And then also just going down the line here, the offensive line on the rewatch, they really stood out to me just because of how they kept Dylan Raiola so clean. They kept him upright for the most part. And then the running game, the running lanes on Saturday for the Huskers were very big. I mean, very big. The big four of Ramir Johnson, Emmett Johnson, Dante Dowdell, and Gabe Irvin, those four guys rushed for 200 yards, I think, just together themselves. And I think it's going to be, we're going to see something similar possibly this upcoming weekend when Colorado comes to town. But the offensive line was a really good unit to watch, and I had fun watching those guys. And then sticking with the running backs, Dante Dowdell, he looked really good. He did not look like he looked like in the spring, according to Matt Rule. And then he shows up at UTEP and he's planting his foot in the ground. He's getting north and south really, really quickly and efficiently and smoothly. And then he's just hammering defenders, trying to bring him down. He's bringing the party to the defenders. So that was really fun to watch too. He did have that fumble inside the 5 yard line, but I mean, come on. Like everybody's kind of wondering, oh, is he going to play? The whole coaches, like all off season, they said, like, hey, if you put the ball on the ground, we're not going to play you. Dante Dowdell is going to play. All right. He looked like Nebraska's best back on Saturday. So I think just some of that is the coaches wanting to speak ball security into existence by just saying those things all off season. But like, I know, Dante Dowdell put the ball on the turf, but he'll play on Saturday. He's not getting benched or anything for one fumble. The receivers, Isaiah Nair, Jamal Banks, those guys looked awesome. They looked, like grown men out there, and so that they have completely transformed what Nebraska can do offensively. Obviously, Dylan Raiola does too with his arm, but he's got to throw some guys in. Right now with Banks and Nair, they just seem like two old guys that you trust, and it was not like that last year where uh, freshmen were playing, just little weak freshmen. So they needed time to develop in college football. And when you get somebody like Banks and Nair to come in, those guys are ready made and ready to roll right away. So that's the beauty of the transfer portal. And defensively, not much to say there. I know they gave up that one long touchdown, that 3 play touchdown drive in the first half from UTEP when they were going super fast. But other than that, I thought they did great. Makai Bear, linebacker, inside linebacker, flying around. I had really fun time watching him. And then also just to round it out, Tim, the return specialist. I thought that was kind of cool to see them have success. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda coming off the ACL. He's a primary punt returner right now. The coaches are obviously very trustful in him back there. He's the best at catching and tracking punts, so that's why he's back out there. And he also returned 3 of them for 25 yards, for 4 yards, 13 yards, and then an 8 yard return. And last year, Nebraska's entire punt return unit it was 48 yards all season. And fans remember them. Just it was just a not a good situation back there. They weren't even attempting to return punts. They were just hoping to catch them. But Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, he returned three punts for a total of 25 yards, and all last season, Nebraska's punt return yardage for total all season was 48 yards. So, in one game, over half of the punt return yards they got. So that's really cool to see. And then also Ja'Cory Barney just looks like he's ready to pop a kickoff return to the house. I mean, that guy is just oozing with electricity and juice. And I think it was in the spring game. After the spring game, he had that long kickoff return where Tristan Albano tackled him, and it's because Barney just accidentally didn't think that his teammate was going to be tackling him there. Then after the spring game, he said, "Yeah, nobody's going to be laughing when I'm taking one back on Colorado," and that's his quote. So everybody knows what's coming up this weekend. It's going to be big showdown. But yeah, just looking back on the UTEP, those are some of the things that really stuck out to me on the second rewatch.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I think Dylan kind of speaks for itself. Like, well, what Dylan
Yes.
did speaks for itself. But I think,
Yep.
like this week's the real big test. 2 weeks from now, Illinois getting into Big Ten play. That's when we really, I think that's when it's like, okay, what is he made of?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically in year one. For me, I think of the receivers, we knew what Jamal Banks was coming in.
Yep.
He's like a known commodity. The thing with
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah Neyor was I just wasn't sure what type of Isaiah Neyor we were going to get. What type
Mm-hmm.
of, like the Wyoming Isaiah Neyor is a dynamic player that can change an offense. The Texas one didn't do a whole lot, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been 2 years removed from that Wyoming, so I was curious to see just what he looked like and him showing what he did in game one. And obviously, it is week one. It is UTEP, a team that replaced a lot. Nebraska was they were a little overmatched. That became obvious. As the game wore on. But the fact that Neor was able to do what he did just gives him confidence to continue to play like that. And again, he had that early drop, which was it was a tough throw from Dylan, a tough catch to haul in. But that's the type of drop that in the past, a Nebraska receiver maybe gets discouraged
Mm-hmm.
and like it just doesn't happen for him. But he bounced back. He had two more or like the best day of all the receivers after that. And I think it also speaks to, like you mentioned, the transfer portal and everything. It's something that I just we haven't really addressed, and I kind of want to address here. I think it speaks to Nebraska's depth at the position now and the top end talent that they're even considering redshirting Malachi Coleman. Like the fact that
Yeah.
that's an idea when he played as
Mm-hmm.
much as he did last year speaks to the depth. Because here's the thing, and I had people texting me about this yesterday and asking me, okay, like, what do you think about what they're doing with Malachi? Like, is he going to transfer? Are you concerned about this? Are you concerned about that? I'm not really concerned. I think he was thrown into the fire a little bit last year, but even coming out of high school and into last year, we knew he needed development. He's a
Mm-hmm.
he's a really good athlete that needs some time to just work in the route tree, learn how to run routes efficiently, learn how to just like master at all three levels. And now he has that opportunity. He's not learning on the go. He's not being thrown into the fire just like go make a play. We need something. We need a dynamic playmaker. We need you to win a matchup. He can still do that. It's not that he can't do that. It's that Nebraska now has veteran guys above him now, or older veteran guys now that can do those things as well. And so now it can be like, okay, Malachi, let's throttle down a little bit. Like let's just focus on learning the playbook, on mastering this offense, building that rapport with Dylan and the quarterbacks in the practice. And I think that's going to be in the long term very beneficial for him. And I think because after this year you do probably lose both Neor and Banks.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're going to need someone to step in there. And I think Malachi's well equipped to do that with some time to just develop and add more to what he has. On that note, I think you touched on most every other like big key takeaway I had. Again, I think the defense, you're just not really going to know much more until they
No.
play some
Mm-hmm.
other teams. And they've got a big test coming in. I think we can jump right into this. Colorado,
Sure.
it's Colorado week. A lot of emotions, a lot of tension just across the board. I'll say this just up front. I think anyone that's going into this game expecting Nebraska to, um, you know, but based on just week one performances and be like, oh, well, Nebraska shouldn't have any trouble. I don't think that. That's not, I think that's foolish thinking going into this game. This is the type of game where Nebraska is going to have to be prepared for a fight. Like, because that Colorado offense can score at will. That defense, I think if you go back and watch that game too, I think they came on stronger down the stretch of that game. There are obviously some questions on that defense. There's some unknowns with this Colorado team just because of how much they replaced. And looking at this team, though, the known commodities are terrifying. Like Travis Hunter and
Mhm.
Shador Sanders are the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest floor and ceiling raisers in college football right now. Those two single-handedly affect what Colorado can do week to week. And again, it can them too, and you rarely do see this in college. Like you do see it sometimes, obviously, but you rarely do see it where okay, these two players can take over a game and win you that game. Like you only need those two players to win you that game. It doesn't really matter what you get from the rest of the team. Those two players can do it. And this year, compared to last year, Colorado has weapons around Shador Sanders and Travis Hunter. They've got a deep wide receiver room. They've got a wide receiver like Jimmy Horn Jr. was the one that popped off last week,
Mhm.
and LeJontay Wester is a very productive receiver that I predict is going to do some things this year. And that's not just me. Like that Colorado program is very optimistic on him. Behind him, Amarion Miller. That's a name this fan base is familiar with. He's another good like reserve wide receiver that they've got just like in waiting that can just pop off at any moment. Will Shepherd, another very talented wide receiver, but with experience coming from the SEC, like a good talented player that should be able to do some things. Last week it was Jimmy Horn's turn. This week it might be LeJontay. This week it might be Will Shepherd. This week it might be, Draylon Miller. Draylon Miller's a freshman. I watched him a ton in
Mhm.
Texas out of Silsby.
Texas guy. Mhm.
He's a dynamic playmaker that can line up in the backfield. He had a key. He did that last week a little bit. He can line up at slot receiver, outside receiver. He can do a couple of different things. And they've got Cordell Russell off the bench. That's a guy that's a little deeper on the bench, but a guy that like is a big body receiver that can go up and get it and has some like nasty like some dog to him. Um, they've got weapons this year, and yeah, like it's just Nebraska's defense is going to be tested, specifically that secondary. I think this game, I don't think
Mhm.
it's necessarily decided by Colorado's wide receivers and Nebraska's secondary, but I am curious to see how Nebraska matches them up personnel-wise because you got a little bit of a test of what it looks like when UTEP went five wide and you had, basically the DBs just lining up head on above them.
Yeah.
I'm curious what they do this week just because, I do have some questions like how can Malcolm Hartzog, you know, line up against some of these quicker, fast receivers. Isaac Gifford, like, is he going to be able to match up one on one? Are they going to do some subs? I'm very curious by that. Kind of early on, kind of what is your going into this just impression of that Colorado offense?
Yeah, I mean the Colorado offense, I mean we talked about it during the UTEP game, Tim, is they're so dangerous and they could do it so quickly too. They might not be looking like they're doing much, but then there's always that potential for that downfield threat with Shitter and his arm and how accurate he can be and how he can throw the ball on the run down the field to those big three receivers, Jimmy Horn, Travis Hunter, and LeJontay Wester. Those are the big three. So yeah, I mean Colorado's receiving core and their defensive and Nebraska's defensive backs. That's going to be a major part of the matchup upcoming. But also, I'm wondering about Nebraska's defensive line, defensive front against Colorado's offensive line, retooled offensive line with the true freshman starter at left tackle and Jordan Seaton. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities, I think, for Nebraska's pass rush to get home. And it's just going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how, like what the quick game looks like with Colorado. Like, are they afraid of Nebraska's defensive front and wanting to get the ball out of Shitter's hands quick? And then that's just going to put the onus on Nebraska's DBs to tackle an open space again. So, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things to look at with this game, but Colorado's passing offense versus Nebraska's D, that's going to be a big one. And then the Huskers defensive front. And just I'm pretty sure they're going to shut down Colorado's run game. I mean, that did not look very very good against North Dakota State at all, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be something similar. on Saturday. So,
Yeah, I think I agree on the running back. I will say I don't. Not to say that they don't. They're like Nebraska right now, just in the sense that they've got like a stable of backs right now. And if you're
mhm.
looking at one specifically that could pop off, Dallin Hayden, I do like his game. I think he can
Ohio
do some
State guy.
stuff. Yeah, I think he can do some stuff as a pass catcher out of the backfield. And even running between the tackles a little bit. I'm curious what kind of looks they give Nebraska this year, just because I do think there was a little bit of last week specifically. They got into it where they were playing pretty much till the final snap, but they worked relatively vanilla on offense. And so, Nebraska was as well against UTEP, like I'm kind of expecting both teams to throw some new stuff out there on Saturday that neither one of them have put on film before. But yeah, I think that offensive line. I think curiously, just my long-standing takeaway from rewatching just Colorado and North Dakota State. Um, I think the tackles held up a little better than the interior of the line, which somewhat benefits Nebraska. Not in the sense that, again, like I do think this Colorado offensive line is improved from last year, and they're going to be able to hold up a little better than they did last year and give Shitter some time to actually make some throws and make some, do some things. Um, but that interior of the line is specifically in pass pro, and this is not like something that's like not unexpected, but it's like what the transfers they got, almost all of those guys, specifically the ones that are starting this year on the line, the transfer specifically along the interior, those guys kind of have this or they're better as run blockers is what as this is the best way to say it. Sorry, but they're
Mhm.
they're better as run blockers, and a little unproven in pass pro. You kind of saw that a little bit last week. I'm curious again, like they're going up against two of the better interior D linemen in the Big Ten in Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson. And Nebraska's got some ability to rotate there, some depth on the D line this year. They'll be able to throw some different things. Again, even like this last week, Tony White was pretty vanilla on defense. He didn't really need to be that exotic.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see some exotic blitzes this week. You're going to see some creative things from him this week. And I'm curious to see how that offensive line holds up to that challenge. I'm high on Jordan Seaton, the true freshman offensive tackle. He's a 5-star for a reason, one of the top players in the country for a reason. But for any young freshman, it's the exact same thing for Dylan Raiola. Like a young freshman in this type of game, mistakes could happen. Like they are prone to mistakes in these type of situations. I'm just curious to see how Seaton holds up when he's got Jamari Butler and Prince Will and Cam Leonard and MJ Sherman and
Mhm.
those guys just like coming at him snap after snap. So curious to see how that holds up. I think flipping over the other side of the ball, Nebraska on offense versus Colorado on defense. I guess what's your take? What's your impression here, and
Well,
kind of how does Nebraska stack up here?
yeah, so one thing that really stood out to me against UTEP was the way Nebraska held on to the ball and owned that time of possession battle. And I know that, sometimes a time possession battle can be important and then not so important depending on like who you're playing and their style of play. But North Dakota State held on to the ball for nearly 37 minutes against Colorado. And, I think, if you put Matt Rule and Tony White and Marcus Satterfield in a room and like ask them like, hey, what's the secret to beating Colorado? And they're truthful. They're like, well, keep Shitter off the field. And so maybe that means a Nebraska offense that really leans on its run game to start. Then obviously once the safety start creeping up, then you can unleash Dylan just like he did against UTEP and throw those bombs deep down the sideline to your Banks and Nayor. But yeah, I'm really curious to see the run game and when they're snapping the ball in the play clock, if they're draining the ball, if they're making it kind of a quicker game just to keep Shadur off the field and keep that Colorado defense on the field against that veteran O line, against those four different backs who are going to be rotating in, and on and being fresh running backs. So, yeah, I'm interested in the time of possession battle and how that shakes out too, because I think that it's best to keep Shadur and that offense on the sideline as long as possible and just possess the ball, control the ball, and establish a run. And then once you establish a run, then obviously those play action chances exist down the field.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like a foregone thing going into the weekend that regardless of the result, Nebraska's going to own the time of possession just because Colorado doesn't seem to care about that.
Yeah.
Like even dating
No,
back to
yeah,
last
and that's
year,
why,
it's
yeah, that's why I like some guys care about it, some guys don't care about it, and that's totally warranted
right.
because of
And again, for
the
Colorado,
way
it's
they
like
play.
when you can score as fast as they can, it doesn't
Hmm.
really matter. But in a game, it does matter, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious for me the what I come back to on this Nebraska offense versus that defense. I'm curious if we see more from Thomas Fidone and some of the bigger bodies on the inside. Carter Nelson's not a tight end anymore. He's considered a wide receiver. But where they line him up at, how much they use him, because my biggest takeaway from last week from watching Colorado's defense is that spine, specifically past the defense, or past the defensive line, because I do like that the some of the guys on the D line, Chidozie Nwankwo, like I covered him back in high school before he went to Houston. That's a this is a this, he's a man in the middle. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
he can fight. I think you're going to see some wars between him and Ben Scott and Micah Mazuka this weekend.
Dayon
They've
Hayes
got
too from Pitt.
Yep. Yep. They've got Hayes. They've got Samuel Okunlola, BJ Green. They've got some guys. That D line
Yeah.
can be disruptive. So again, Nebraska's going to offensive line. They passed last week's test in Maurice Westmoreland, and
Hmm.
I'm curious to see how they
Who
pass
was a
this week's test.
non-factor. It was almost
Yeah.
like he was not on the field. So
Right.
that I mean, and he was my guy going into the game, and I was very high
Right.
on him.
And
Um,
again, and this I truly mean this, and I know, yeah, this may be taken as disrespect. I truly don't mean this as disrespect. I truly mean this in like this is how much I respect Maurice Westmoreland and believe in his long-term potential. But I do believe Westmoreland is a better pro prospect than some of the edge rushers Nebraska is going to see this weekend. That being said,
mhm.
the D line as a whole for Colorado is better than the D line
Much
as a
better.
whole, much better than the D
Hmm.
line Nebraska faced this last week. So I'm curious to see how the O line across the board holds up. I still, going into the season, we were confident in the interior of the line, still very confident in them. Justin Evans, not even a pleasant surprise, but like just a dominant
He
guard.
was it was really fun to watch Justin Evans comboing up to the second level and like getting a little bit of a linebacker and then like that being the read that the running back used to like either like cut inside or cut outside that linebacker coming down and Justin Evans was just like always right on him catching the linebackers like okay I'm helping you boom I'm going over there getting two birds with one stone. I really Justin Evans is hard to move.
Might be
He
the
was not.
unsung hero of the offense by the end of the season. Might be
Yeah,
the like,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean he was not blessed with the height that his teammates were. But he's like 310, 315 pounds. He is short, but he is powerful and it's hard to get under his pads and he does a lot of the moving.
yeah, moves well. And so I'm curious to see, like I said, how that's. But I do think just coming off that North Dakota State game, Nebraska's line. Oh wait, Colorado's linebackers and safeties little like just questions there. Like I think there's an opportunity there for Nebraska, whether that's Jalen Lloyd and Ja'Cory Barney out of the slot, where you get some mismatches a little bit from a speed standpoint. You match them up on one of the linebackers or the safeties, or you get Nebraska's tight ends. You use the height mismatch. With a
Hmm.
Thomas Fidone or a Luke Lindenmeyer or a even a Carter Nelson out of the power slot type, or a Jaren Bonner, like a big physical wide receiver as well. So I'm curious to see how Nebraska utilizes that. Obviously, I'm curious. I trust Dylan to make smart decisions just because that's who he's been his whole career, even dating back to high school. This isn't a guy that turned the ball over a
Hmm.
lot. He made a lot of smart decisions on Saturday, put the ball in harm's risk at times. And I think, coming out of the game immediately, I was like, he didn't do it that much. But then rewatching it, I was like, okay, there were a couple of throws where I think Dylan would probably like to have that back. And some
Hmm.
placement things specifically where he's throwing basically across his body. Or back towards the middle of the field as he's rolling out. And just against Colorado, when it's Travis Hunter in coverage, or it's Preston Hodge in coverage, or it's DJ McKinney in coverage, or it's Colton Hood in coverage, like those are
Hmm.
guys. Like those are legit, like those two or three of those guys are going to play in the NFL, in my opinion. Like Travis Hunter for sure.
Hmm.
Like Travis Hunter, top five pick, almost certainly at this point. But the rest of that secondary, specifically the corners, are legit, and they've got some rotational guys at safety too that I'm curious to see if they come along. Ian Massey was an Oregon State transfer that came in kind of late, and I do like Massey. It just kind of depends on how quick he can get with the program and adjust because He was a very,
Hmm.
very late addition. But that's a guy that, could kind of be an upgrade to that safety room based on what they showed
A
in
safety
this
room that loses Trevor Woods to the inside
right.
linebacker
That's
room
now an
too.
inside linebacker.
That was a interesting move for me because I loved Trevor Woods at safety in the third level, but he was always kind of that bigger body, kind of that Isaac Gifford type. But they straight up moved him to inside linebacker as kind of like a faster option at inside linebacker, and then they paired him with Levante Bentley a lot, obviously, who was there last year too. So yeah, I mean Trevor Woods at inside linebacker for Colorado too could potentially give them some pass coverage help at inside linebacker. But then, like, you always wonder how he's going to hold up inside the box if the run game is coming right at him, too. So
He and
that's going
he
to be it.
he was weird was he struggled a bit last week in coverage, just like manned up on people. So I'm curious to see again who Nebraska throws at him because he can stick with most every Nebraska running back on the team right now, in my
Sure.
opinion. But if you put him with against Jalen Lloyd or Ja'Cory Barney or even like a Carter Nelson, like you start to see a bit of the size and speed mismatch there. So again, curious to see if Nebraska exposes that, what they do there. Before we get out of here, we've kind of touched on a couple of different things, and I think there's just so much, again, somewhat unknown here with Colorado. But I'm expecting a dogfight. I'm expecting, again, I before the season, I had Nebraska losing this game. Week one doesn't change a whole lot for me because I need to see Nebraska do it, step up in a big moment in prime time. They haven't done that in a couple of years of just like stepping into the moment and living in the moment. Before we get out of here, I guess like takeaways. What are you feeling and about this game?
Well, I'm usually the one to not pick Nebraska until I see it do something that it hasn't done in a while. I'm always like that with like Wisconsin. If they're playing Wisconsin, I'm like, well, until they show they could beat Wisconsin, like I'm going to pick Wisconsin. Same thing with like Iowa, even though they won two seasons ago. But this weekend, I don't know. Like it's going to be at home. The place is going to be juiced up. The electricity is going to be flowing under the lights. I think Nebraska's going to get this. I just have a good feeling about how they played. I think, UTEP and Colorado are two extremely different opponents. However, I just liked what I saw from the vibe from the Huskers against UTEP. They completely dominated that game for most of it, and it's just, it's I, under the lights. The fans are going to be jacked. I'm sure there's going to be some scuffles on the field. Shiloh Sanders is my guy who's gonna be like the in my pick to maybe ruffle some feathers of and get under the skin of some Huskers, but I don't know. I'm just feeling good about Nebraska and how they looked last weekend, and I don't know. I think the defense is going to come up, and I think they're going to not shut down, but just kind of limit what Shadur Sanders can do on offense, and I think the fans are going to play a part too. I think there's going to be some delay game penalties as well.
Yeah, I agree. And something I will mention this because it popped up this weekend in some other big games, Miami versus Florida, Texas A&M versus Notre Dame, because of the in-helmet communication now. Someone mentioned it, and it is interesting. At the NFL level, most stadiums are 50, 60,000, and it's relatively passive, the crowd, just the
Yeah,
atmosphere.
it's not
At the
like college
college
games.
level,
Yeah.
like Kyle Field, 100,000
Hmm.
screaming.
Hmm.
Memorial Stadium on Saturday, it's going to be 90,000 screaming.
Yep.
Like what that means for both Nebraska and Colorado, because both sides struggled with that. Like at Kyle
Hmm.
Field, I think both Texas A&M and Notre Dame kind of struggled with the crowd noise and trying to hear what was happening in the helmet. You saw some issues with that as well. And so again, for Colorado specifically, like how that works for them. And again, this is an offensive line that hasn't played very many games together because it's a unit that's been put together by
Exactly.
the transfer portal.
Yeah.
How they hold up when there's noise because we saw a bunch of those across college football this week of false starts where an offensive tackle just turns around and straight up just tells the quarterback, I can't hear you, or the lineman just turns around and is like, I can't hear you. And you're going to get a couple of those this weekend. And again, the thing about Colorado, they can negate those like those second and 15s, third and longs
In
very,
one
very
throw.
quickly. So Nebraska needs to
Yeah.
be on top of their game this weekend defensively. I'm curious what the rotations at the safety room look like to kind of
Hmm.
match up against the personnel looks they'll see. And then offensively from Nebraska, I guess my lasting thing here is people are expecting a lot from Dylan. I think this is going to be a test for him naturally. But this is a game that for Nebraska to win, they don't need to lean on Dillon. They need to lean on the run game. You just need, again,
Yeah.
like you said, manage time of possession and also run it. Like, until they can show you they're going to stop the run,
Mhm.
run it. Because for 2 years now, they've not shown the ability to stop the run. And
Mhm.
I think Nebraska needs to at least test that as much as they can with that stable of backs they have.
And when you get that run game established and that extra safety enters the box and you have one-on-ones on the outside, maybe don't test Travis Hunter. Maybe instead go after DJ McKinney or
Yes.
Preston Hodge. Just don't,
Yes.
maybe don't throw at Travis Hunter and let him go viral for doing something wild
Yes,
again.
I was going to say, and that's what, like, when I was saying earlier, like, I trust Dylan to make smart decisions. I do trust that Dylan is not going to test Travis Hunter unnecessarily. I
Yeah. And
don't
I,
think
and
he's
yeah.
got that in him because I've seen quarterbacks, we've seen it in the 7-on-7 when Travis Hunter was playing 7-on-7. You see
Hmm.
DBs or quarterbacks that will test him,
Hmm.
and just to see if they can do it, and it never turns out well. So
And I
would
don't want to,
recommend.
yeah, I don't want to
Go
say
ahead.
like, because Matt Rule wants to be aggressive with Dylan Raiola and they don't want to shy away. And maybe that is, not playing aggressively if you're intentionally not throwing it to one side. But like, dude, like Travis Hunter is a dude. He's an NFL playing college football right now. So it's just like, maybe they shouldn't test him that much, I
Yeah.
guess.
And on that note, we'll leave you to it. We're excited to see what happens this weekend, and we'll be back next week.